Now, my hoki mai. This interview today is with Ants Cabraal, who has worked for years with Inspiral, has a deep knowledge of communities working together, has got an interest in this next stage of Web3 in DAO. He's not a technician, he is all about community, and this was a chance for me to sit down with him and pick his brains around this new world of decentralised organisations, which he is phenomenally experienced in. So I'm really right. Cool. Welcome back, everybody. I'm in Wellington today. I'm talking to Anthony Cabraal. Good afternoon, Anthony.
Good afternoon.
And can I call you Ants?
You can call me Ants.
I'll call you Ants. And I've asked Ants what is it, and he's just trying to work out what he is. So that's interesting. Have you any closer to what you are, Ants?
I'm a human being that sends emails and does video calls for a living.
Fuck, that's fascinating, eh? That's cool. We're going to talk for hours about that, Ants. Right on. And I'm talking to Ants because you're visiting from Australia.
From Australia, yeah.
Yep. I've been back, and I have met Ants through the Edmund Hillary Fellowship and aware of your work with Inspiral as well. So, Ants, before we kick off, who are you?
So my name is Ants Cabraal, Anthony Cabraal. I'm currently living in a little town just out of Melbourne called Castlemaine. But I spent the better part of the last decade in Wellington running around helping to build an entrepreneurial community called Inspiral. And over the last few years, I've got more and more involved with the Edmund Hillary Fellowship as one of the kind of Inspiral adjacent projects. And a few years ago, published a book called Better Work Together with a bunch of my friends from Inspiral. And have done a few other various projects through and around New Zealand over the years in the social impact space, entrepreneurship space, helping people with good ideas, trying to make the world better, make those ideas come to life.
Have you ever had any good ideas?
I have. You'd have to ask the people I work with. Some of them, I have a lot of bad ideas.
Yep.
Some of them are less bad than others. Occasionally, maybe there's a good one in there. Yeah.
You're a bad idea person.
Yeah.
Ants, just look, I am intrigued with Inspiral. Tell me about that.
Cool. Maybe some of the backstory, why it was so relevant and important, such a relevant and important phase of my life. I landed back in New Zealand in 2011, just after the Christchurch earthquakes. 26 or 27, something like that. Broke, unemployed, single, confused, figuring out the next phase of life after having done a bunch of travel through Asia and deciding that I didn't want to work in advertising. So I landed in Wellington, got into a share house and started getting busy trying to figure out how to use my brain for good. And it was right place, right time, right people kind of situation. And I bumped into this little mob of folks from Inspiral. At the time, it was mainly software developers, led by Joshua Vile, who was in full flight at that point, community building, starting projects. And he had this compelling vision around, hey, we've got some pretty serious problems on planet Earth, systemic issues, not just sort of things that we can solve with charities. And we don't have enough human capital and human potential going into solving those problems. So we've got a structural issue, which is we need more people spending their lives working on stuff that really matters. And that rung a lot of bells for me. And then I sort of got involved with this crowd, got to know a few more people, and there was just a lot of really interesting conversations about how can we change the way in which we work together in order to enable more people to be able to do this. There were all these funky experiments going on, let's just share the brand really openly with people that we trust. Everybody set your own rates for whatever you're going to charge. Keep 80%, put 20% back in the middle, and we'll decide together what we do with that 20%. And that led to a whole lot of conversations about decision making and sharing money. And I found it a really infectious, sort of intoxicating place to be. Really smart people, all from different backgrounds, lots of programmers, lots of kind of activist crowd, facilitators. There are a few folks with a more commercial background, like I came from a marketing background, but others like accountants and lawyers. So there was this kind of stew of interesting activity. We had a co-working space down on Allen Street. And so that was kind of the foothold for me to like kind of jump out of a paycheck role and into this kind of entrepreneurship space and try to figure out how to build a livelihood that aligned with my values. And we had a bunch of cool sayings that made sense at the time, like, like work with people that you love on projects that you love, and change the world while you do it, and, lots of stuff like that.
So they made sense at the time. Do they not make sense now?
They still make sense now, but I think looking back, there was a whole lot of naivete about like, oh yeah, we'll just go start companies to change the world. That'll be easy. Or that'll be, why isn't anyone doing that? We should just do that. Turns out that's really hard. And so there was a lot of failed experiments, and, it was around about that time that the whole early stage technology startup scene was also being catalyzed. Like there was one little co-working space in town at the time. New Zealand the Creative HQ crowd started the Lightning Lab, which was New Zealand's first technology accelerator. So I was actually a participant in that accelerator with that's a whole other story. But it was around about that time that the kind of Kool-Aid was rising around high growth tech startups, business for good, tech for good, social enterprise was kind of words that started coming in around then. So, yeah.
So 20% of the gross funds or net funds?
Gross funds. And, there's a whole lot wrong with that model. And then we learned a bunch of hard things along the way. Like, if a whole bunch of people earn consulting revenue and put 20% into a shared bank account, it looks like that shared bank account earns a lot of profit. And then over tax years, you get into trouble. And we learned a bunch of stuff that meant that made no sense.
Okay. So from a human behavioural learning thing, right? Great melting pot. What were the key learnings through that phase?
One really big one that stands out and still stands out to me was, it was probably intentional in design when I think about the humans that were involved, the people like Joshua Weil and Alana Irving and others who I have a lot of respect for how they think and how they move through the world. For me, it was a happy accident, but this idea of, hey, let's engage as equals. Let's genuinely not have a CEO or a leadership team or even a governance board. Let's meet as humans and solve this stuff together, peer-to-peer. What that did was, for the first time in my professional life, there was no ceiling above me or anyone else. And so we were able to just lean into that naivety of like, yeah, let's just give this crazy shit a crack. And what happened was we figured out the problems that we needed to figure out. And so there was this huge learning curve, huge growth curve of like, I used to be a marketing person, but then it was like, okay, well now it's like biz dev, and now it's like, building teams and leadership. And then it was us figuring out like what co-governance looked like and transparent decision making and all that kind of thing. So when I look back on it now, that taking that ceiling away and giving everybody the permission to step into their own leadership meant that a whole lot of growth was catalyzed. And that still remains a very powerful idea. And I know that one of the things that we want to talk about is this DAO thing, but I think that's one of the seeds that I experienced in the early days of Inspiral that I see a lot of potential for in that space as well.
And look, we'll get to that. Because the thing is that, so going back to the ceiling was taken off for you. So how did that catalyse in you? How did that show up?
It showed up by, instead of going, that's an interesting idea, but that's not going to work, or I'm going to have to ask this person to see whether or not I have permission to do that. The thought process is more like, okay, well, there's nothing stopping that happening. So am I going to take responsibility for that and see if that will work? And then learn through that process. And when you're doing that around a whole lot of other people, there's all this mutual support around like, hey, that's a great idea. Why don't you do it? And then, it sucks that it didn't work. Like, let's have a beer and talk about it. What are you going to do next? Oh, I've got a contract coming up. Why don't you do a little bit of that? So there was kind of this two things. One, no ceiling, but the other one was a safety net a social safety net. And, we're having this conversation in Wellington. Inspiral was basically built by folks with, fairly high levels of privilege and education and social security and that kind of thing. So it wasn't like we were on the street if we didn't make it work. And a bunch of us were living off, $120 a week and squatting in share houses and all that kind of stuff too. So there were no mortgages and babies and things like that at that time either. But those two factors, there's something very powerful that happens if you genuinely feel like you are safe to fail and that you are supported to be able to take risks with a community that is going to be there for you even when things don't go well.
I would imagine, and this is a guess, that some people, it might not have been good for their behaviour.
Yeah, totally. Like without constraints, a whole lot of patterns come out for sure. I mean, I can reflect back on that for myself. I get very excited by new ideas, and I probably could have been more effective with more constraints for sure. And I know that there's folks that were around at that time that really struggled, like it just wasn't the right fit, or also they burnt out because they gave and gave and gave and gave, and there was nothing in the system to keep them safe in that, so they just flamed out and were, taken advantage of, or not consciously but the system chewed them up basically. The other side of that story is that when you are taking radical responsibility for your livelihood, you have to figure that stuff out through doing it. No one can tell you what to do or what not to do sometimes.
So, Ants, is Inspiral still operating now?
It's still alive, yeah. It's interesting because yesterday afternoon we had a lovely catch-up at one of my old Inspiral friends' place, and a few of us came together, and it was just really nice to be around those people again. And, I'd say Inspiral now lives mainly in chat groups and groups of friends that build 10 years of connection together. Operationally, the system is still alive in a sense. There's still Inspiral Foundation Limited, a New Zealand company that holds some capital on behalf of the network, and actually really recently we've just gone through a long, slow process of updating our agreements and creating a big structural shift from the system that's held the network for the last probably 8 years, maybe longer, with one circle of Inspiral members supporting a wider circle of Inspiral contributors. We've just updated that to a whole new structure where any 3 people can basically start their own circle. So it's kind of taken another level of decentralization. And so as a system, it's still alive, but I'd say my take would be culturally or energetically, the campfire is not as hot as it used to be. Like the coals are still there and warm, but if you want to spark something, you're going to have to do more than just walk past and give them a kick. You're going to have to bring a fire lighter and, tend the fire and get it going again. And there are folks doing that in Europe. There's a couple of kind of older Inspiral members, Richard Bartlett and Nati, who have sparked a community in Europe, and that's starting to grow. And that's in a whole different stage of development now, but it's a similar model.
And so moving towards the DAO stuff, and why, specifically I'm talking to you now, and so you've written a series of articles on Web3 and DAO and your thoughts on that, which I've read. By the way, I've bought your book. You've said you've written more than one book, but I've read your big blue book with Susan.
Correct, yeah.
That you and it's in my car now and intending to read it. It's a big book though. It's taken me a while to...
I have a short attention span as well, and to be honest, I don't know if I've read the whole thing in order. We co-produced that, Susan Basterfield and I. We co-authored that with 11 other Inspiral folks. So the hack was I didn't actually write the whole book. I just had the idea and told a bunch of my smart friends that I needed them to write a chapter, and then produced the thing and sort of ran a golden thread of content, of production and writing through it. So in some ways it was an easy way to write a book.
Is it any good?
I think it's pretty good. It's it's a reflection on why we built Inspiral, what it felt like from different angles and perspectives, a bunch of stuff contradicts itself, which is kind of the point. But it was designed as a little bit of a provocation for folks who are interested in this idea of building collectively driven organizations, whether they are kind of weird entrepreneurial collectives like what we built, or whether they are some sort of a membership structure or a cooperative, or even to build more collective identity and power into existing organizations. Yeah.
So Ants and Spiral at the time was ahead of itself, right? Ahead of the game?
Yeah, you could say so in some ways, yeah.
I mean, from the outside, it looked a bit wacky.
Yeah, that's when you generally know you're ahead of a curve, whether the curve is a good curve or not. But yeah, we definitely were wacky, and because I often bridged different worlds, especially like, being in some of the Lightning Lab spaces and the more traditional tech investment models, and then this kind of wacky bunch of hippies who were sharing money using funny spreadsheets. Totally different. And I remember a lot of conversations around that time where decentralization was not really anything anyone was talking about. The kind of first crypto, blockchain-y, Bitcoin-y kind of conversations were around in some of the early and Spiral spaces, but at that point it was just this kind of weird speculative currency thing, and there wasn't really a connection to this idea of decentralized organizing. And so most people, when we brought that up, were kind of confused or scratching their heads, or like, are you talking about cooperatives? Like, what is that? Which is very different to today.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I would have never put crypto and decentralized together until 2 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Right, it was just like, what? What's the commonality there? And I would have never put in Spiral and crypto together and 2 years ago, or even 12 months ago. But now I'm going, okay, and what I'm really interested in, because I think that you are sitting on, and other people in the Spiral are sitting on, a bunch of deep, subtle knowledge that is possibly about to find its vehicle to really amplify. That's an opinion, yeah. So, Ants, tell me about these blogs you've been writing. What's that about?
Yeah, cool. Okay, I guess I started this year, 2022, just wanting to get my head a little bit more around this whole Web3 space, because too many people that I respect were diving headfirst in for me to ignore it. And there was a lot of noise and, like, oh, it's all a grift, and there's like these NFT casinos, and why are you wasting your time with that? But then there were just other people who I know that are just solid technology builders and really solid human beings that were like, you really got to get your head around this. And I guess I've been in technology spaces for a while and, around tech startups, but my lens of seeing the world is not really that technology centric. I tend to be more in the people stuff, the creative stuff, the storytelling, the narrative building, the how do we, unlock the best in the people, that kind of thing. So I was trying to get my head around Web3 from that perspective. And then I jumped into a bunch of different DAO projects and Discord projects earlier this year. Got a sense for some of the stuff that was happening in a few pockets of the spaces, listened to a whole lot of podcasts, and then just started to weave and think through and go, okay, where's the intersection between all the stuff happening in the Web3 space, all the experiments with tokens and crypto economics and that stuff? Where does that connect with this idea that we've been brewing on and bubbling on, which is around how do we work better together? What are non-hierarchical, decentralized collectives and spaces and teams? What do they look like when they connect with that DAO stuff or with the Web3 stuff? And there's a lot of talk about DAOs and token-gated communities and things like that. But I was kind of more interested in what have we learned about creating organizations that are decentralized, where people are autonomous and there is an organization. So, it was reflected back to me by other folks in the Web3 space that Spiral was something like a pre-DAO DAO. we didn't have any tokens. We had a New Zealand limited liability company and a group of directors and shareholders and spreadsheets and weird software, and we used those tools to create a decentralized autonomous organization. It probably would have been a hell of a lot easier to do it with tokens and crypto wallets and things like that. Joshua is actually now sort of kicking around ideas with a bunch of people about setting up a Web3 version of Inspiral. And so I would describe that as something like a similar organization with a 2022 operating system as opposed to a 2012 operating system. And it is actually pretty scary to go, there's only 10 years between those things, and the whole world has changed in that time.
Yeah. In that space, in some industries not so much.
Yeah.
But in this space, it's like light years difference, isn't it?
Totally. Yeah.
And I know we're getting a bit jargony here, so I should have done this before. So tell us what a DAO is.
It's a DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which I think if you ask a bunch of different people what that means, you're going to get different answers. My answer is it's an organization that's been designed explicitly to distribute or decentralize control from a small group of people or one person to many people. And it's designed to create as much agency and autonomy in all the participants as possible, so that it can't be you're not building a pyramid that's operated to one person's vision. You're building something that's more akin to like a garden that's, people are popping up emergent projects from a bottom up space. And then, so there's that, and then there's also this whole layer of like Web3 technology that you could use to enable that to happen. So I'm actually less familiar with some of the intricacies of how you use tokens and crypto and stuff. I've been more in the like, what does it actually look like at a human organizing level?
Yeah. So we're talking to Ants not as a technician, but from that human point. NFTs, how would you describe them?
That stands for non-fungible token. And so my take on that would be a little specifically provable, unique piece of the internet. So you can copy and paste something, and then you have two files that are, there's no way to tell which file is which. With a token system, you can. You can still make a copy of the file, but you have a different level of traceability. And I have a very simple brain with this stuff, right? So it's like, when you go to a gig and you hold on to the ticket stub, that's a very specific thing to you. There's only one of those in the world. It's the internet equivalent of that.
That's the first time anybody has been able to describe it to me and for me to grasp it. So
that's why they pay me the big bucks.
There you go. Thank you. That's seriously, I'm just going.
There's probably a bunch of people listening to this who are like, that's not right.
The good thing is, Ants, nobody listens to this shit. It's just, we've got 2 followers, right? There's just me, and my auntie listen to this shit. Yeah, so it's good. It's, it's just, that's all that listens to it. Yeah. Mate, that is the first time I've gone, got it.
Cool.
Got it. Yeah. And look, it's interesting. We've just produced a piece of art for Collective Intelligence. That's not a logo. It has been created by one of our members who's a Māori artist, and we want to turn that into an NFT. And I'm going, yeah, let's do that. That's cool. Thinking all the time, I wonder what that actually means, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean? Yeah, okay. So now I'm going, got up. And it's interesting because back in the day, people used to collect those tickets and go, this was an amazing concert, and they would put it in their scrapbook for, because they had this wonderful time at this concert, right?
It's a simple analogy, and it also makes it easy to understand why this first wave of hype around NFTs was around collectibles and identity collectibles. People were using $100,000 Bored Ape profile pictures because it's an identity piece, it's a collectible piece. Like, that was kind of the obvious low-hanging fruit that caught the buzz, got
Yep.
it into the world.
Yep. And also reflecting on Web3, if it was Web 1, we're at dial-up stage. It's very, very early, right? So it's, Web3 is a baby
Yep.
and is working itself out, but really, really quickly and moving.
Yep.
Yeah. Ants, where do you see the potential of these DAOs? How do you see them showing up and being applied?
The ideas I'm getting most excited about generally are coming from people that I trust that are seeing very interesting problems to solve where it makes sense that a different kind of technology would be needed. So the best example that I have in the top of my head now is my good friend Joseph, who we both know through EHF.
Who was the original CEO of EHF? Yep.
Correctamundo, yeah. He's doing some really interesting work in Africa in the Web3 space because he has spent some time there. He has some background context of that of different parts of Africa, and just seeing the patterns of behavior of how people are kind of leapfrogging the financial infrastructure. All the stuff that we take for granted around having a bank account, using credit cards, that kind of stuff. There's a whole wave of folks that are leapfrogging that, and the Web3 stuff is super well positioned to make life easier for an entire generation of folks. And there'll be a whole lot of new solutions that come out of that. And so with the DAO thing, like connecting that...
I just stop there. So going back to that example, because most of the people listening to this, there's actually more than two people listening to it, but most of the people listening to this will not be familiar with DAO or Web3, right? Okay, so go back to that. So the leapfrogging the normal system. So they're not going to have credit cards, they're not going to have bank accounts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but like some of I'm hearing this from Joseph and reading some of his work, but there's a bunch of folks where if you want to buy fiat currency in some of those places, it's a lot more expensive to buy fiat currency from a legitimate currency exchange than it is to buy tokens using a crypto wallet, because you have borderless access just like anybody else anywhere else in the world. So for the first time, genuinely, the money doesn't care where you are because the pipe is the same pipe. You don't have to route it through different things. So you can use the same exchanges that someone in America is using if you're in Ethiopia, or if you're in Sri Lanka or wherever. And I think that's a very, very big thing that's hard to get your head around when you grow up in a Western country and you don't understand just how difficult that is for so many people and how structurally unequal that is. Even the whole remote work wave, like I worked with some folks in Sri Lanka, I've my family in Sri Lanka, to help me build some websites. And for them, it was a big deal to be able to charge $11 an hour to help build a WordPress website, which is great, but it still goes through this weird pipe, right, where for them to turn that into rupees that they can buy some bread with, they still lose 30 or 40% of it along the way through remittances and things like that. And so there's access to an economy, but there's also this unequal pipe that they have to deal with. So I think one of the big promises of the next wave of financial technology built by Web3 systems and crypto technology is that pipe is a lot fairer for a lot more people. So there's a bunch of work that's happening in that space. I think that has less to do with DAOs specifically and more to do with the actual infrastructure.
Yep.
But that's the kind of stuff that's getting me excited, where I can see a very clear and useful thing that can make society better or make things better for people.
Okay, so then moving on to the DAOs, how do you see those being utilised?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's some things that are really magic about working in decentralized systems, and some things that are really hard as well. So, one of the things that I would love to be able to say is like, it's way more effective and efficient to build a company in this like decentralized manner, and it's going to outcompete, the next Facebook is going to be a DAO or but I don't know if that's actually true, because there is a whole lot of centralized coordination required to get anything big off the ground, especially if you're allocating capital. Whether it's resource capital of a team of 4 or whether it's allocating the capital of like $100 million budget that you need to grow a company with. The jury's out for me on that, but where I again get excited is like not a DAO, but in spaces where you can see bottom-up thinking being put to really good use. One of the more interesting projects to come through in Spiral, in my opinion, is a software tool called CoBudget, which is an open source piece of software that we created to help a group of people decide collectively how to spend the group's money. And it was less like budgeting, even though it's called CoBudget, and more like funding. So it was like a collaborative funding tool. And Francesca, who's a EHF Cohort 1 fellow, and has some strong links to New Zealand, she's been leading that project for the last few years. And they've been doing some interesting work with some Swiss philanthropists who said, we've got a bunch of money, the world's on fire, we want to distribute this money to a group of climate activists very quickly. And we want to do an experiment where instead of us doing the usual grant writing cycle and all that kind of stuff, which optimizes for particular outcomes, we're going to put that money into a CoBudget account, and we're going to trust the network of well-known climate activists to figure out how best to distribute it. So they ran this kind of like fast-paced participatory funding process using CoBudget. And that created this whole system of like decentralized participation in this thing. I don't know if they would have. I don't think they would have called that a DAO, but that to me is an example of if you've got a shared community treasury, and you put the right constraints and connections around it, stuff's going to bubble up really quickly, bottom up, and it's absolutely going to be things that would not have gone through a normal top-down, write the grant application, respond to the RFP, blah, blah, blah process. So I see something there around DAOs being a really interesting container for distributing bottom-up sort of funding things. There'd probably be more if I thought about it a bit more, but that's an obvious one.
And so, Ants, just going back to Facebook, the comment we made about Facebook. If Facebook was a Web3 company, so at the moment it's a Web2 company, it's got a founder, it's got a CEO, it's got a board, it's got shareholders, and lots of wealthy shareholders would have got very, very wealthy with Facebook. Yeah? If it was a Web3 company, how would it be structured?
It's a really good question. The short answer is I don't know.
Fuck. This is not ideal.
The longer answer would be there's some cool experiments that are happening, some of which are actually like sparked out of New Zealand. There's a really cool project called Scuttlebutt.
Hang on, stop.
Yep.
Go back. Imagine if, okay, so you don't know, imagine if Facebook was a Web3 company, what could it look like?
I think the closest thing would be probably something like what is emerging out of Scuttlebutt, which is a really, again, this is my kind of hack knowledge, but a really interesting technology protocol that allows developers to build a bunch of essentially like a decentralized social network that doesn't live on any centralized servers. So there's a bunch of technical stuff there that makes that really interesting. I have no idea what it is, but I trust the people that are excited about it. And there's not a company that owns that protocol. There is not a centralized organization that is driving the outcomes of the people using that technology. So it's a lot more like, I guess, how the internet itself grew in an open source way. So it would probably look something like that, some interconnected mesh of different things. I think where it gets tricky is you and I both have this shared language of Facebook and shared usage, understanding of I know what you're talking about when you say I posted on Facebook or I like this or I like that. So it's like trying to put the layer of social coherence on top of this distributed software stuff. What that looks like, I'm not actually sure, but I think if we can get to this place of user-governed, user-owned, user-controlled social networking or peer-to-peer communications, it would look something like what's bubbling up through Scuttlebutt.
See, I'm really interested at the moment, Ants, and I'd love you to your opinion on this. At the moment, in New Zealand, we've got some from a farming background, and at the moment we've got people very grumpy that you've got international companies coming in and they're buying farmers and putting them into pine trees to offset their carbon credits and so forth, right? Putting them into pine trees. And it's a lose-lose situation in many ways, because it's destroying communities, it's putting pine trees on the land forever, it's creating a monoculture thing. It's not good, it might soak up carbon, but it's no good for biodiversity and so forth, right? And people are getting really frustrated with that. Farming is also becoming more and more for the wealthy only, and it's always been like that. But to go farming now, I don't know how much capital you would need, but you might need $10 million as a starting point to actually get started to be able to farm on any sort of a commercial operation. I'm really interested in how DAOs could affect the behaviour of, or the whole social infrastructure of farming. And that you could have people from the cities being shareholders in a farm. You could have your market being shareholders in the farm. You could have a whole lot of social change, and to make it a lot more accessible, and to bring the urban-rural divide together as well. And I'm really interested in exploring that and promoting that, and going, this farm doesn't have to sell to a overseas conglomerate to offset their carbon. We have got different methodologies of owning that land. And of course in the DAO there could be shareholders and so forth from overseas, but I'm really interested in marrying up the ownership of the land, the production of the food, and the market over here, all interconnecting, and makes it easier because you're going to have a tangible asset there as well, and there's going to be some intangible worth in there as well, and
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's cool. Yeah, I can imagine if the economic pressures of taking on a piece of land to farm it mean that essentially your viable options are super extractive and not that helpful, and you've got trade-offs between, do we just like smash it full of pine trees and try and get the lumber as fast as possible, or just intensively dairy or do whatever to you're losing somewhere along that way. If you can change the economic constraints and pressures for that piece of land, then you could steward it in a whole different way and still make it commercially viable. I think that's cool. I have, jumping out of the reality of how the legals work and into imagination land, which is where I prefer to be anyway, I can imagine that being really compelling, right? Like we're sitting here in Wellington, probably buying our food from Pack and Save in New World, and maybe a tiny sliver of the population is supporting the community-supported agriculture projects and things like that. But if there was an option that made a lot of sense and was fairly normal, that you had some tokens in your crypto wallet that were your sort of like connection and governance and ownership stake in a property that was being stewarded by you and 10,000 other people, that meant that there was a vibrant community that could grow food in a less environmentally harmful way, do some cool stuff with it, do some values aligned stuff with it, run an education centre, blah, blah, blah. And the wealth was genuine, the wealth and the risk and the responsibility was spread over more people, then you would probably get different outcomes, right? And the people who are actually putting their hands in the soil and growing the food would have a different support base and a support network and a risk profile, and it wouldn't be the bank versus them versus the consumer, which is kind of probably how they feel a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yep. And the shareholders and the people in the DAO, or whatever you call them, would have an interest and could be your actual market.
Yeah.
So they're telling you what they want.
So I guess the thing that's nice about that example is we could quickly draw draw a version of the future that's different from the current one that's better. But a DAO is really just a tool. It's just a way of organizing. Just like a limited liability company is a tool and a structure for organizing. So there's nothing particularly magical in that itself. But if the legal constraints change and you were able to do something like that, that could be cool. I mean, maybe you could do that now with an equity crowdfunding raise. I'm not sure what. I think you can raise $2 million in New Zealand, but there could be an equally accessible way.
And look, it's something I'm playing with at the moment. I'm working with a very clever woman, Catherine Vandermeulen, who's an Australian woman living out here, from a non-farming background, from a fashion background of all things, and she's doing some stuff on agriculture. She's targeting 15 to 70-year-old young women and their place in agriculture going forward. And and I think DAOs would, at the moment it's this wall. It's really hard to get into in a meaningful way, other than being a labourer, and that's not the end of the world. But there is that's where it generally begins and ends. So I see this as an opportunity to bring different paradigms on and different thinking in for the future, so people could think about their positioning. What do you think in Spiral, what do you think they're going to look like in another 10 years?
It's a really good question. Well, there might be some people who are coming on as teenagers at that point with their parents who are doing this in Spiral thing a while ago. So I'd be really interested to have that conversation with the children of some of my friends. Given how much the world has changed in terms of technology and the internet in the last 10 years, it's very, very difficult to think about 2032 and just the level of scope of change that will be. I had a conversation on the weekend with somebody who was talking about cracking open a technology problem to make saline-powered batteries that you can put into contact lenses to create AR. So there's some sci-fi shit going on that may land and helps us sort of recontextualize a whole lot of our relationship to the people sitting across from us as well as the world around us. So I don't even want to have a crack at thinking how far along that would be. But I think the thing with Inspiral is, relationships. There was a saying that I love and I still think is an awesome way to build any organization, which is prioritize the relationships over the deal. The relationships live longer than the logos. And when you're really excited about a project, you're like, yeah, this project, there's so much energy that goes into the logo. So many times I've learned over the years that it's the magic is in those relationships, and logos come and go, and so that piece I think feels really clear. There'll be a group of people that know each other really well, like mycelium, and there might be some weird little new mushrooms that pop up. I would love to do some more projects with my old Inspiral friends, and I think EHF is another example of a solid group of human beings that are being convened or attracted around a mission that are also building community, and those processes, they're magic. There's real power in that stuff. So for any organization to be successful in being decentralized and autonomous, ironically, I think the most important thing is that long-term trust building. I say ironically because a lot of the hype around Web3 and blockchains and the technology is that they're trustless protocols that don't actually need intermediaries to be able to function. So to me, it's a 180, and it's it's trustful relationships and organizations is where that's the groundwork that needs to be done to be able to be effective and autonomous and distributed. So there's a huge chasm to cross there, I think. And if I think about my friends who are all over the world right now, hosting and facilitating and doing the mahi and the work to bring groups together to build self-managing processes and all that kind of stuff, it's all trust. It's all trust building and creating spaces to be vulnerable and slowly but surely weaving some sort of collective identity together.
Yep. I'm just reflecting that when you're talking about that, I was just reflecting that's exactly what collective intelligence is about. You know?
Yeah.
Our currency is trust.
Yeah.
And that, you know, we are becoming less and less, I don't think we've ever been like this, but less and less interest in somebody's position or status, because ultimately if you can't trust them, who gives a shit?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's just like, and then what does trust mean to you, and what does trust mean to other people? You know, because it's a, you know, I cannot say to you I'm trustworthy, right? It's something I've got to earn, right? It's something you can say about me, but it's not something I can say about myself, and I've got to earn that over a period of time. And you know, it's interesting, Ants, there are people that we have worked with in the past, and we've got some that we work with now, that you can't trust them. And you can't trust them because you think, are they going to turn up or not? Right? And then they don't turn up because they've got some excuse, and you're not surprised. It's a fascinating thing. And yet you've got other people who might not turn up, and you know there's a really good reason they haven't turned up. But there are some people that just for some reason haven't learnt the actions, repeatable actions, to be trustworthy.
Yep. Yep.
And they can be as clever as all hell, but at the end of the day they can't leverage that. Because people aren't going to go to, you know, they're not going to be in the trenches with them.
Yep.
Because you go, well, I could go and be in the trenches, but I'll be by myself.
Yep.
It's a fascinating thing, eh?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that takes time. That totally takes time.
Yeah. Ants, what else do we... Because I realise that you've got to go. You're in Wellington for a short time, right? And what else do we need to cover off in this podcast?
Well, through the conversations that we've had about collective intelligence, and you know, I've just spent the weekend with the Edmund Hillary Fellowship doing the next welcome experience. So that's top of mind for me, like the trust building container that thing is, to welcome a group of strangers onto a marae together, and then 3 days later to be weaving this collective identity with a punamu around their neck. It's really powerful, that process. And when we've had our conversations about collective intelligence, one of the things that struck me is you seem to be sitting on a very rich, potent mycelial network of trusted Kiwis who have the secret nudge, nudge, wink, wink, I'm part of that crew too, walking in lots of different industries across this country. So I have a real curiosity about, like, what are you planning to do with all of that? How does your current interest in all this DAO stuff, what are the mushrooms that are gonna pop up from that mycelial network? So, and I have an interest in how can I help you with that, but maybe that's a longer conversation.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I talked to somebody recently and saying, you know, collective intelligence. I know who it was. It was a guy, Kevin Whitmore, with the Callaghan Innovation. And Kevin said, so you guys going to spin up a DAO? I said, yep, we are. He goes, and what's it going to do? I said, oh, fuck if I know. No idea, but I really want to do it. And it's interesting, and it's one of the things, we've been on an 18-month journey with creating Collective Intelligence 2.0. and so that gets launched in fully fledged mode in January. And I'm really excited and looking forward to that. And it's been 18 months of introspection, research, a whole range of stuff, and it's going to look like a rebrand, but it's so much more than a rebrand, and I'm trying to get that down. And one of those is looking at, why do I do this work? Well, it's been really interesting because I didn't know why I did this work, and that's through this process I've learnt that. And one of the things that we are doing right now, and we've learnt a thing recently. We've learnt a new term called cadre. And oh God, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. So it's a French term. It's a French parenting term, apparently, and it's around particularly the mothers set the boundaries and go, here are the boundaries that my children can play in, right? But the boundary is very, very clear and visible, and this is the boundary, and children can do your thing in there, but you cannot go outside there. And we're really interested in that at the moment with collective intelligence as we decentralise, because you cannot when we've tried some stuff this year where we've been too loose, right? And then people just drift all over the fucking place, right? And they don't know that they're not on task. So we're learning as we decentralise that using this term cadre and go, right, so you guys are working on this thing, and this is your scope, and getting really clear at the beginning on where are the boundaries and what it is that you are here to do. And then getting out of the way and let them get on with that. Now, that's not a natural inclination for me, because I can be really casual and not give enough guidance. And so we are getting better at giving the guidance right off. So that's one of the things that we're getting better at. And then the first thing that people will see is that we are creating our first village. So we are creating a online village that gets launched, and it's being populated now. So up until now, collective intelligence has been about teams. And if you think about those teams as houses, those houses have never been able to interconnect, and in an elegant way, right? So I had a great advice by a wonderful woman, Mary Beth Robles, who was a CEO of ours about 4 years ago. And I've always wanted to be able to interconnect the community, but we could never find the technology that we really wanted. So we looked at Slack and stuff like that, but it didn't do what we wanted it to do. And so now, because of COVID, we've now got the technology, we've looked at 4 different platforms, we've settled on one, and now we can take those houses, or our teams take those houses, and we can interconnect them and create a village.
Nice.
And I'm really excited by that. And then looking at the values of a village and getting really clear about that. And then the alumni will be part of that village. And then associates will be welcome to be in that village. And we need to work out, who do we want in the village? Because we don't want it to be exclusive, but we do want trust to be present. And trust is the currency of collective intelligence. So how do we maintain the trust? And we don't want it to be New York, right? And the village may get some size to it, but the village values are going to be profoundly important. And it's not a place that you can sell in the village, but it's a place that you can procure. So you can market your wares, but you can't knock down people's doors, go, here, I've got a cabbage to buy, right? So we don't want people getting flooded with emails of people selling them things on email. So it's there to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I've been working through that very, very slowly and deliberately through that. Yeah.
Cool.
And then after that, I'm not sure. That's going to consume us next year, and we've got a wonderful team of people working on that. And the DAO thing, I got very excited when Alex Hannett introduced me to DAOs 14 months ago or so, go, wow, this is great. And then the more I've looked at it, the more complex it is.
Yep. Yep.
And the more it's just like, there's no point rushing this.
Yep.
And we need to just quietly go about it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a piece of advice that I got told that I often try to remember myself, which is, like, don't worry about setting up the structure. Worry about the activity and the people. So do the activity and the people, and at some point it's going to become clear what structure you need. So if you come at it from like, I'm going to start a DAO, that's very different to, I'm going to do a bunch of activity that's aligned with a mission with some people, and at some point maybe it may make sense to deploy tokens and create some structure around it, but it's it's just another tool in the drawer like anything else. So I guess I'm curious about the village, and that sounds cool, and like as that grows and develops and forms various connections and does stuff, and people pop up their little marketplaces and burn others down and whatever, there's going to be heaps of stuff that comes out of that, and maybe some of that will give you the answer about
The next stage.
Yeah. Maybe we do that here.
What's interesting, we started going down the track of wanting to recreate the Ngāhere, which is the New Zealand native bush, right? And we use that metaphor in lots of different ways, but we wanted this village to replicate the Ngāhere. And we did an awful amount of work on that, Ants. What was fascinating, we realised that human beings are not smart enough to replicate the Ngāhere. We don't know how mycelium works. We don't know how mycelium can send a pulse from here 16 kilometres away in a very short period of time. And for the mycelium to respond over there to something here. And so the mycelium brain just exceeds what we can cope with. So we had to give up on that for now because, man, it's too hard.
Yeah.
It's too hard. We're just not smart enough to copy that.
Yeah.
And we can be inspired by it.
Yeah.
But the village is something that we can get our heads around.
Yeah, nice.
Right? And so I had to give up on that, or we gave up on that, going, this is too hard. And it's a lovely, the more I've read, mycelium's only been studied for the last 30 or 40 years apparently. And it's had very little funding, but there's a whole lot of stuff they don't know.
Yeah.
And so we went, too hard.
Yeah, nice.
Too hard.
Yeah, I think the village thing is cool for a few reasons. The scale piece is really important in that. One of the more interesting projects that, well, for me anyway, that's come out of the Inspiral Mob in the last wee while is some of the work that Richard Bartlett and Ngati have been leading in Europe, called Micro Solidarity. And what I think they've done well is paint the social physics, the things that happen in social scenarios at different scales. So how do you create belonging between two people, and what does that look like? The social physics of that are so different to creating belonging at a scale of 5 people, and that's so different to creating belonging at 20 people, 200 people. And so Richard's done a really good job of like kind of architecting some different phases, putting some language to it, and starting to drill down into like what are the practices that we would do at these different scales to experience belonging, and to build belonging and to build trust. And so that when you were talking about the village, something that's nice, that lands nicely with that, is that at its outer edge, it's a scale that we all feel comfortable in, because ultimately that's kind of the scale and size in which we evolved, and we have there's the 150 people Dunbar's number thing, and we experience that a lot with Inspiral. And you ask me what it might look like in 10 years, probably actually is lots and lots of small groups loosely connected into a much larger group, which I think would be much, much more powerful and effective than one big group. And that was actually one of the cheeky little ideas that we had when we launched the book, was like, the UN is the world's top-down coordinating force that we currently have to like fix shit, and it's made up of big governments, and then it goes top-down from there, and it's got about 40,000 people that work in it, and I don't think we're gonna leave it up to the UN to fix the shit that we need to fix, right? So what does the opposite of that look like? What does a bottom-up, self-governing, vigilante UN look like? And so the provocation that we had when we wrote the book was, at the time, Inspiral was about 200 people. And we were getting pretty close to a replicable blueprint of what a high-functioning, self-governing, self-managing collective of 200 people looks like. And we had a pretty good idea of, like, you know, how that works as a social system of support, how that looks like as a financial system, as a decision-making system, all of these kind of complicated things that we'd figured out. So it was like, if we can do that as a bunch of sort of anarchistic experimental Kiwis, what if we could make that model replicable and we could create 200 collectives of 200 people? And that's the same amount of human energy as the UN is deploying with 40,000 people.
Mm.
And that seems attainable. And then you go, well, imagine if we had the same amount of resource.
Mm.
Holy shit, what would happen? So that kind of, you know, the stuff that you're talking about with the village and the mycelial, that.
Yeah, and look, our challenge is going to be getting people out of the houses.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah.
Because our members love their teams.
Yeah.
You know, and I also know that when members meet each other from different teams and so forth, there is a bond there, right? A bit like the fellowship, right? And so we know that exists, and now we've got to be able to. And not everybody's going to want to leave the house, and that's okay, right? Yeah. It's not a compulsory thing, and also getting through to people that the platform that they're going to be on is not social. You know, it's not a social media, right? It's not there to be busy or noisy. It's there as a resource that you can tap into when and how you want, right? And it's not going to be about the likes, and it's not going to be about the chatter and all that sort of stuff. It's about a place where you can find resources that you can trust. And if you use it once a month, that's fine. If you use it once a year, that's fine. It's up to you. And, you know, we've got our criteria. We've got one guy an associate, very experienced guy. He's in his 70s. And he said, I'm going to be available one day a month. Right? I'm going to hang up my shingle and go, I can help people for one day a month. Because I want 4 jobs a year. And I'm happy to help people out one day a month, and you can come and ask me for advice and stuff. And I'm going, there we go.
Yeah,
that's
great.
cool. Okay, got that. So that you can allow that. And his thing was, if it's social media, I'm not going to be there.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's cool. It's definitely not social media. Yeah. Ants, what brings you hope? Last question for the afternoon.
I don't think it's going to matter how bad or difficult the future is going to be. That doesn't matter, because there's always going to be people that find meaning and purpose and joy in making the world better for themselves and the people around them. And as some of the people that I've been, you know, lucky to be in community with over these last years, as I've seen them grow and increase their resource, their influence, their mana, their power, their money, I see them just doubling down and leveling up their abilities and their intentions to just keep doing the work. So I'm trusting that pattern, and it feels good. And yeah, I'm going to keep doing it.
Ants, thank you for this conversation. I have really enjoyed this. I wish we had more time.
Don't we all?
And I'm going to stay in very close contact with you and try as you have figure out this world of Web3. And I have really enjoyed your blogs because it's not going to be the technology we need to work out. It's going to be the social interactions, how we be in this space. I think that's the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a fun conversation. I've enjoyed it.
Cool. Thanks, Ants.
Thank you.